Well, thank you very much. And we're going to get started now. So it gives me great honor to welcome you all today here. I'm Wafa El Sadr, and I'm the Executive Vice President for Columbia Global. It's really gratifying to see you all here at the forum, so welcome. I also want to welcome the many people who are joining us today virtually from around the world. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge some special guests that are joining us today. And first, of course, I want to acknowledge President Bollinger. Thank you, President Bollinger, for joining us today at this event. And also, thank you very much, Jean, for joining us with Lee today. I'm also very pleased to welcome and note the presence of Mario Artaza, who's the Consul General for Chile in New York City, as well as Renee Rui Diaz, who's Deputy Permanent Representative and the mission of Chile at the United Nations. I'm also very glad to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Karen Yarhimilo, who is the Dean of the School of International Affairs and International and Public Affairs. Welcome, Karen. And welcome to former Provost John Coatsworth. We're very honored by your presence today as well. Now, I want to acknowledge and welcome the family members, Karen's family members, Karen Poniachik's family members. She's the late and beloved director of the Columbia Global Center in Santiago, whose memory we are honoring today. We're so pleased that we have two family members who are joining us here in the auditorium, and that's Denise Gutman-Tener, welcome, her cousin, and Benny Pollock, who's her uncle. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really an honor. I want to also acknowledge the family members who are joining us from Chile, including her daughter, Anita. I want to also acknowledge our colleagues from the Luksic Foundation in Chile who have supported the center over the years and who are also joining us virtually today. So why are we here? I think we're here to celebrate two things. We're here to celebrate a century of collaborations between Columbia University and Chile. And highlights of this 100 years of partnerships are chronicled in this remarkable book, and you'll hear more about this book shortly. We're also here, of course, to honor Karen's memory, to recognize her passion, her dedication, and commitment, and the many lessons she leaves us with. Now I want to give you a little bit of brief information about the Columbia Global Centers, of which the Santiago Center is one. The centers were launched almost 15 years ago by President Bollinger, and currently there are 10 global centers that are situated in South America, in Africa, in the Middle East, and Asia and Europe. These centers are emblems of President Bollinger's vision for Columbia as a university that's fully engaged with the world. The centers serve as hubs for student and faculty engagement and also as catalysts for important discourse and action that are focused on tackling some of the biggest challenges that we face as a global community. I will now move briefly and go through the agenda for today's meeting. You can see it on the screen. Firstly, President Bollinger will say a few words of welcome and opening remarks. This will be followed by two brief presentations, one by Professor Vicky Murillo, who is the director of the Institute of Latin American Studies. And the second presentation will be by Carla Magri, and Carla is the Development and Communications Officer for the Columbia Global Center in Santiago, who really led all the efforts to put together this remarkable publication, this book that I just mentioned to you. We will then pivot to a panel discussion that will be moderated by Tom Trebat. And Tom is the director of the Columbia Global Center in Rio de Janeiro. And he's going to introduce our panel discussants and lead the panel discussion on some of the most important issues faced today by Chilean society as part of the conversation. So thank you all very much. And I want to invite President Bollinger I welcome you to the podium. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you very much, Wafa. So I would like to just say a few words about Karen and express our sympathies to the family and to all the friends, especially back in Chile. There was a moment in time in which the idea of having physical spaces around the world that Colombia could draw on to try to expand our knowledge and our work and interact with people around the world was just an idea. And there were many other universities that were thinking similarly, and many universities chose different paths from the one that we did and have. But it wasn't clear that this was the right path for a university. I remember Jean and I going to Santiago. This is just, we have the fondest, warmest feelings of being there. And Karen was going to be the director. I had not met Karen before, we had not met her before. But of course, we took instantaneously a liking and a respect for Karen. The country was amazing. The hospitality, the greetings were fantastic. Andronica Luxi, others really embraced us and the ideas, the project. The Karen was amazing. And I remember thinking, this is going to be a success in Santiago no matter what. I mean, but the main point I really want to make is that Karen was not just a great director of the Santiago Global Center. She was a great figure, a great person, a great public servant, a great activist in Chile, in South America, and beyond. And the feeling was that if Karen would want to be the director of Colombia's Global Center in Santiago, that proved it was the right idea. So the ability to attract somebody of that talent, of those capacities, somebody I remember saying countless times, the Minister of Mines wanted to become the director of the Colombia Global Center. That was proof that this was the right course. So Jean and I just loved being with her. We were shocked, really deeply saddened at her passing. We want her daughter, Anita, to know that, and her family, all her friends and colleagues in Chile, and all her friends and colleagues here at Columbia. And I should say that at that time we were there with John Coatsworth and Pat, and that of course was a spectacular introduction to Latin America, and I got to hear John interact with people and the respect and regard that he has held throughout the country and the region and the other countries. Remarkable. So on behalf of Jean and me, I just want to say we have lost a great, great friend and figure, but somebody who was whose life was proof that a great university should be doing what Columbia has been doing. Thank you.
Welcome everyone who is here with us, here and in Chile, to remember Karen Poniachik and to discuss the issues she cares so much about: the connections between Colombia and Chile, the exchange of knowledge between the global North and the global South, and the importance of ideas for social change. I want to start by expressing my condolences to Karen's family here and in Chile, especially to her mom Clara, her daughter Anita, and her brother David, who are with us remotely. And let me please shift for a second to Spanish. Clara, Anita y David, les ofrezco mis más sinceras condolencias en nombre de nuestra comunidad por la enorme pérdida que han sufrido. Nos ha afectado a todos por lo mucho que apreciábamos a Karen y por el privilegio que tuvimos de poder colaborar con ella. I will say some words about Karen for everyone before we start with a video of her, followed by a presentation of the book that was just mentioned about more than 100 years of intellectual and practical interactions between Columbia University and Chile, and then a panel on the work of this fantastic Santiago Global Center that we just heard about, which provides a window into how international connections change people across the globe. Karen had a relatively short but intense and meaningful life that was linked to Columbia through both her education and her job directing the Santiago Global Center. More importantly, she dedicated her life to building Chile's future while making both local and global connections. Through her life, Karen had spent a good deal of her time building bridges between the US and South America, between academia and practical knowledge, between the private and the public sector, and more importantly, between people creating connections that produce transformations for change in the real world. Today, we're here to celebrate that wonderful life. Karen graduated from the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA, at Columbia University, and the dean of the school is here with us. Karen graduated before my time as faculty at SIPA, so unfortunately, I cannot take any credit for her extraordinary career. After graduation, she developed an exceptional career that included journalism. She was the correspondent of Chile's Channel 13 in New York City, private sector participation in many company boards and organizations, such as the Council of the Americas and the American Chilean Chamber of Commerce. More crucial was her commitment to public service. Among her many positions, Karen was the first woman Minister of Mining and Energy, the director of the Metro, and Chile's representative who negotiates her country's entry into the OECD, all under President Bachelet, as well as the Foreign Investment Committee, chair of the Foreign Investment Committee under President Lagos. Karen was also a pioneer in promoting women participation, both in the public and the private sector. She advocated for women inclusion in company boards. She was also an active board member of the Fundación Chile Mujeres and the International Women's Forum. She broke stereotypes and made choices that were not necessarily what was expected of her. Her personality loomed large, as I could confirm when her friends spoke of her at her funeral, which I attended remotely. It was thanks to her role as director of the Columbia Global Center in Santiago that I had the fortune to meet and collaborate with her, first as a faculty member and then as the director of the Institute of Latin American Studies. Karen was an impressive woman. In my own experience, I perceived her to be both warm and energetic. We connected immediately. When I had the chance to collaborate with her as director of the Institute of Latin American Studies, we developed many joint initiatives. During the pandemic, as our work became remote, we coordinated virtual events, internships, and other activities. She has so many ideas, which gave us the opportunity to keep chatting over WhatsApp and became closer. We also became closer because she helped me navigate my mom's diagnostic and treatment of pancreatic cancer, which she was battling herself. Being so close to that illness, I couldn't help my admiration for her capacity to continue working to the point that most people did not know she was ill. I visited Chile in early August of last year, and I couldn't meet her because she was in the hospital. However, she had a list of activities for me, including a discussion of the presentation of the book on Chile and Colombia with Carla Magri. This was her last project, and she cared deeply about it, as Carla will tell us soon. So let's do as she would have liked us to do and start discussing her intellectual legacies with a video of her life. Please play the Remembrance video of Karen Poniachik. Thank you.
He roto esquemas y me he sublevado en contra del modelo en el que se supone deben estar insertas las mujeres. No ha sido gratis, ¿ah? He pagado muchos costos personales, he sido muy criticada, pero me siento tremendamente orgullosa.
Autoridades se reunirá esta semana en Seattle y de parte de los países europeos, con los que espera llegar a un acuerdo favorable en el marco de la rueda uruguaya del GATT. Para Tele 13 desde Nueva York, Karen Poniachik.
Pero aquí se aborda materia económica, sociales, laborales, ambientales, agrícolas, en fin, lo hemos visto en los estudios que se han hecho sobre Chile en el último tiempo.
Hacer alarde de esto porque es mi universidad, mi alma mater. Quiero mencionarte que en la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York, más del 50% de los decanatos están en manos de mujeres. El Estado de Chile debiera asumir un liderazgo en lo que es la incorporación de mayor diversidad a los directores, porque le hace bien a los directores.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, President Bollinger, Wafa, and Vicky, for your kind words towards Karen, our dear friend and mentor, and towards our center and the work that we have been doing for more than a decade now in an effort to bring together Colombia and Chile, making sure that your vision for the university, President Bollinger, became a reality. What I will do is to give an overview of our book, Columbia University and Chile, over 100 years of history, which I think many of you are already familiar with. I'll explain how this idea was born, how we did it, and then I will hand it over to Tom and the panel. As you all may know, this is a history book. So in many ways, it's a book about the past, but it's also a book that speaks to us about present collaborations, and moreover, a book that looks towards the future. 4 days ago, Chile and the United States celebrated 200 years of diplomatic relations with the motto, Partners for a Better Future. And that's how we think we should look at this long history of collaboration between Chile and Colombia, as the initial 100 years of a fruitful relationship that will keep developing in the future. The initial idea for this book was conceived before I started working at the Global Center, during the first year of the pandemic, when the network of global centers through which Colombia has presence in 10 countries and 4 continents created a virtual internship program which allowed Colombia students to work in companies, universities, or NGOs during the first pandemic summer. A few of them worked at the Santiago Center and started the research for this book. At the time, we had some scattered topics, names, and dates, and the idea that the book should be around 80 pages long. That was the situation when I joined the team in May of 2021. But along the way, we discovered that there was so much more history than we originally had thought. So it became evident that aside from the work done by the students, in order to do this how we envisioned it, we needed to reach out to academics and researchers. That's how the book started growing and growing until it became this almost 300-page brick. I would like to point out that this was as much as my fault as Karen's, because not only did she not stop me, she kept encouraging me and giving me ideas of what pictures or letters we could find. And that's how the book got a life of its own until Carolina, our designer, who I will be eternally grateful to, told me to stop and to tell Karen to stop as well. So I don't want to give too much away of its content because, of course, we want those of you who haven't read it to do it. But I will briefly go over some of its content, which has 4 main focuses: Chileans that studied at Columbia during the 20th century and their contributions to their country. Upon their return, Chilean politicians, academics, and artists that spent time here as lecturers, researchers, or visiting professors. Columbia faculty members that have worked on topics concerning Chile or mentored Chilean students. And lastly, the university's response to the military dictatorship of Pinochet that ruled Chile between 1973 and 1990. Because of Columbia's commitment to democracy and the respect for human rights, the university was a safe space for very prominent political exiles of the Chilean dictatorship. Okay. So, the opening chapter is dedicated to our great poetess, Nobel laureate, educator, diplomat, and intellectual Gabriela Mistral. Though we knew she had taught at Barnard in the early 30s, we had no idea the role that Columbia played both in the launch of her international career and in her personal life. 100 years ago, at the end of 1922, her first book, Desolación, was published not in Chile, but here at Columbia's Instituto de las Españas, which is now the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures. Spanish professor Federico Doniz, the founder and director of the institute, managed to convince Mistral to make a selection of poems to publish, something that she had been until then too shy to accept, in spite of having received several offers before. 24 years later, after the publication of Desolación and briefly after Mistral had received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1945, Virginia Gildersleeve, who was the dean of Barnard for many, many years, invited her to a reception in her honor. And I will finish this story with a cliffhanger, although I'm afraid it's mainly for the Chileans in the audience. But it was at this reception where Gabriela Mistral met Doris Dana, who was a Barnard graduate. So it was here where this famous and controversial relationship began. So second chapter is dedicated to Enrique Kirchberg. He was an academic and a member of the Chilean Communist Party, who was also the first democratically elected president, or rector, as we call them in Chile, of Universidad de Santiago. He was imprisoned for 2 years after the September 73 coup, and following pressures from academics, both from Columbia and other East Coast universities, who organized a campaign pressuring for his liberation, he was released and allowed to travel to the US. He lived in New York for 12 years, during which he taught at CIPA, Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, while remaining as an active member of the Chilean opposition to the Pinochet regime, organizing rallies and giving lectures in order to create awareness of the human rights violations that were undergoing in his country. The third chapter is dedicated to a long astronomical collaboration between Colombia and Chile. Today, Chile is acknowledged as an international center for observational astrophysics and a place where researchers from all over the world converge. But this was not the case 70 years ago. When the basis for this lasting relationship was built thanks to the work of Columbia professors Isadora Epstein and Patrick Thaddeus, allowing for renowned Chilean scientists to study, teach, and research at Columbia, like Maria Teresa Ruiz, recipient of the National Award of Applied Sciences, who in 1975 had become the first woman to ever graduate with a PhD in astrophysics from Princeton, Leonardo Bronfman or Mauricio Vitran. The legacy of Columbia's Teachers College in Chile's educational development, it's a pretty big legacy, and it's actually one of the starting points of the book. A former teacher college student and a friend of the center, Rodrigo Mayorga, he wrote a book dedicated to the history of education in Chile, in which he included tables with the names of several dozens of Chilean graduates from Teachers College during the 20th century. It was the first chapter that we commissioned to someone else, another Columbia alumna from SIPA, Martina Majlis, with whom we interviewed the sons of fascinating people like Corina Vargas and Luis Tirapegui. But I won't say more, as Regina is the absolute expert in this area, and I'm sure that whatever I can say, she can do much better. Chapter 5. This chapter tells a story of 3 professors who during the 70s and 80s taught and worked at Columbia, excelling both in Chile and in New York. All 3 of them have remarkable life stories and achievements. Juan Asenjo is a chemical engineer who, for 6 years, between 1980 and 1986, worked at the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And after returning to Chile, he received the National Award for Applied Sciences for his pioneer work in biotechnology. Pedro Rosso, he is a pediatrician. He worked at Mailman, the School of Public Health here at Columbia, for 12 years, where he taught and studied the relationship between infant malnutrition and brain development. After returning to Chile, he became Dean of the School of Medicine at Universidad Católica and subsequently University President for 10 years. And Giorgio, who I had the pleasure of interviewing for the Enrique Kirber chapter, he is also a pediatrician and an expert in human nutrition. He worked for the National Health Service of the Salvador Allende government as the head of the nutrition department, from where he led the medio litro de leche, or half a liter of milk, an iconic public policy that aimed to end infant malnutrition and mortality. He was a political prisoner of the dictatorship, and he left Chile under similar circumstances that Enrique Kirber did. And although their teaching activities were completely different, what brought them together was their commitment to the Chilean cause and the work that they did in parallel to their academic life, the one of denouncing the situation that was going on in Chile. During our conversation, Giorgio told me about the support and generosity that they received from the university, from university president, who back then was Michael Sovereign, as well as from the Columbia faculty, who always supported their activities. Then the Chilean suffragist movement. I will also leave this chapter to the panelists because I'm sure that Nara and Regina can do a much better job than I can, but I will just say that even though I didn't write this chapter, the making of it was one of my favorite parts, and it was definitely Karen's favorite chapter. She became obsessed with the señoritas that came to study in the early 20th century and all of their achievements. So it was very exciting to see how many brave and brilliant and unstoppable women that studied here in the early 20th century, like Graciela Mandujano, Ana Figueroa, and Olga Poblete, among several others, of course, became the leaders of the Chilean feminist movement, fought for women's right to vote, and became some of the first women to hold diplomatic positions and to represent Chile in the United Nations. Then Nicanor Parra. This chapter is dedicated to Chile's witty and modern poet and anti-poet. Was very unexpected. The book was officially finished, and it was already being designed. I'm pretty sure we already had a first draft of the first 2 chapters. When I was looking for something in old issues of the Columbia Spectator, and I came across the news that Parra was going to teach a creative writing course. So I told Karen that we needed to include this, that he deserved a chapter. And she agreed, but she told me that I should give it to someone else to write because I had enough on my plate and I needed to learn how to delegate, which for anyone who knew Karen would sound ironic because if someone had trouble delegating, that was her, but I was able to convince her. And I'm very glad because writing about Parra, his brilliant mind and his creative writing workshop was definitely one of the highlights of this project. And lastly, the last chapter is dedicated to Chilean presidents of Columbia, a history of diplomacy and democracy. In writing this chapter, it became evident to us that the long and strong diplomatic history between Chile and the US had allowed a constant presence of Chilean presidents at the university. 9 out of the 12 democratically elected presidents in Chile during the last 80 years have visited Columbia to teach, give conferences, receive honorific degrees, present books, or sign academic agreements. Moreover, every president since the return of democracy in 1990 have been here. From Patricio Elwin, who in 1990 gave a moving speech about the value of democracy, to Gabriel Boric, who in September of last year was here at the World Leaders Forum next to Wafa and Vicky. So to wrap up, I just want to say that although we think that this book does not cover, we know that it doesn't cover the complete history of Chile and Colombia, we think that it provides a glimpse and helps us understand over a century of collaboration between Chile and one of the world's leading academic institutions, and how this relationship has benefited both our country and the university, evidencing the impact and positive consequences that bilateral relations can have in the development and history of countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you who have come before us in the program. It's my great honor to moderate this panel. I'm Tom Trebot, the director of the Columbia Global Center in Rio. Karen and I were colleagues, friends for many years, and worked together. She helped me a lot in the development of the early days of the Rio Center, and we stayed in close contact, including with these wonderful professors and students who are going to address us in just a minute. It feels like there should be another chair at the end there for Karen to be sitting in. But what I thought we would do today, in the brief time that we have, I'll keep my own remarks to a minimum, but I'd asked each of the professors, Professor Nada Milanic, Professor of History at Columbia and Barnard College, Professor Walter Betjen, a renowned scientist at the Institute for Research, International Research Institute for Climate and Society in Lamont Doherty, Professor Regina Cortina from Teachers College, again, who's done much work herself on the history of Teachers College in Latin America, and Astrid Lieding. Astrid, welcome. It's wonderful to have a Columbia student with us, a recently named Rhodes Scholar, I might add. So Astrid, Karen would be very proud. I wanted to follow the remarks made, I think, by Carla, that we're doing with the way forward. And it says, Karen's work is unfinished. The great work that you heard described, it's important and it's necessary to push on, and we'll do that. And I'd like maybe the professors in equal measure to address really how they knew Karen, the importance of some of the work we've heard described, and then importantly, what lies next for Chile and Colombia. And Nara, really welcome, a close friend of Karen's. It's wonderful to have you here. I wonder if you might want to start with a brief reflection on Karen herself, and then I'll ask you some more pointed questions.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be here to be able to talk about Karen, about our friendships and our professional associations with her. I distinctly recall the day that I met Karen in 2011. It was on the eve of the founding of the new Global Center, and Karen had already been tapped as the director, and I was told that she was an ex-ministra. So I was actually very intimidated to meet her, a former minister. So I recall going into room 802 of SIPA, which is the Latin American Studies classroom, dedicated classroom, and meeting a woman distinguished by her vivacious approachability. And I also remember distinctly, I think probably the first conversation we ever had on a very important and timely, urgent topic, which was calugas. For those of you who aren't familiar with Chilean candy, calugas are a kind of caramel or toffee. So one of I think my first conversation with Karen was about calugas. She had actually brought candies to a meeting with Chilean students at Columbia, and I thought that was such a wonderful touch on her part. The ex-ministra, serious, smart, professional, who also has this, this real sense of how to connect with people. We immediately became friends. And very quickly, I came to appreciate a central fact about Karen, which I think is obvious in probably running through all of our conversations and comments today, which is that she was a connector, right? A few months after we met, I had the opportunity to spend several weeks in Santiago. I was there for the launch of my first book, which is a work of Chilean history. And in fact, the launch of my book was the very first event that was hosted by the new found Global Center. And Karen was in charge of organizing that event. And I know for any of you who have ever been involved in organizing or being a part of an event that Karen organized, you can't imagine a better person to be in charge. And it was really in the course of that visit and then in the 10 years afterwards that I came to appreciate this central characteristic of Karen, which is that she was a connector. I have met Chilean filmmakers and academics, policymakers and writers, journalists, thanks to Karen. And so, she was somebody who really understood the power of connection across people, across institutions, across countries. So it seems to me very fitting that we are here remembering her personally, but also on a panel about this century-long connection between Chile and Columbia University. She really was, we've talked a little bit already about Gabriela Mistral, about Amanda Labarca, these leading luces of Chilean history. And Karen was really the next chapter of that history. She is part of this long-standing, century-long connection, dense set of ties between this university and her country. So I'll stop there. I could keep going, but I will stop.
You could keep going. There's wonderful things to say, and thank you, Nada. Nada, I wonder if we might delve into some of the topics that you just referred to, and that's the emergence of the women's movement in Chile. A question for an historian here. We saw some pictures. Graciela Mandujano, a graduate of Columbia, was the founder of Chile's first feminist party. Amanda Labarca, some of the first reading circles in schools for women when such things didn't really exist in Chile. Aida Parada, a fighter for women's suffrage, a right only obtained in 1949, but by Columbia students from Chile who'd seen the suffrage movement here in the United States, and no doubt that had some influence. I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit. Now, I've heard you speak before about the emergence of the women's movement, something we didn't quite expect to find when we delved into Chile-Columbia history.
That's exactly right. So we saw already from Carla's wonderful presentation, something of the deep connections, this history of connections between Colombia and the Chilean feminist movement. And, prior to the writing of this book, the story of Gabriela Mistral, who taught for several years at Barnard, where I teach, who was a professor of Spanish there, that story was quite well known. We know, for example, that Gabriela Mistral met her life partner, Doris Dana, at Barnard. In fact, I recall very distinctly a number of years ago when we screened Locas Mujeres, Crazy Women, a documentary about Mistral and Dana in a hall, an auditorium at Barnard where they supposedly met. I think there are very many stories about where they supposedly met. And of course, Karen was the organizer of that, as so many other encounters. So we knew about Mistral before this book was published. What we did not know was the story beyond Mistral, this story of dense connections that this book that Karen spearheaded, that Carla and others worked so hard to put together, really uncovered. And I want to emphasize how I'm a historian of Chile. I teach classes on the history of gender in Chile. I have taught on this campus for 17 years, and I knew nothing about this connection between these feminist luces, important feminist leaders in Chile, and Columbia University, and specifically Teachers College, which of course Regina, my colleague, is going to talk about momentarily. We didn't know about this history. And I think this is really one of the book's most important discoveries. I think there's actually a whole dissertation to be written, possibly Carla no. So I think that the chapters on Teachers College really make clear the importance of these women, and both for bringing back ideas about education to Chile, but at the end of the day, ideas about education and pedagogy are also political ideas. So this is a history not just of educators, although that would be sufficient. It is a history of political women, right, who go back to Chile with ideas about progressive pedagogy, which includes ideas about gender equality, ideas about non-hierarchical education, et cetera. And so those are not just pedagogical or educational ideas, those are also political ideas, and ideas that of course have had a really important role in the history of 20th century Chile.
So much now. I was going to go on and ask you a question about the agenda in the future, but I think we'll hold that for the Q&A afterwards. But thank you very, very much, Nada, for those comments. Walter, welcome, bienvenido. It's nice to have you here. Walter, Chile and Colombia, as we've seen briefly in the book, a long history of scientific research collaboration, notably in astronomy, but of course, in more modern times in climate research, where you yourself are a noted expert, food systems, alternative energies, and so forth. Chile is one of the most geographically fascinating, for those of you who haven't been there, and diverse countries in the world. I still can't absorb it all myself. Deserts, glaciers, mountains, oceans. Can you describe for us, in terms of global climate challenges, Chile's relevance today? What is it we are learning from Chile? What challenges are they facing in Chile in terms of the climate crisis? What are the opportunities that Chile might be offering us to deal with climate mitigation and adaptation? Thank you, Walter. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom. So first, it's a real honor to be here celebrating 100 years of Columbia University collaboration with Chile, but especially celebrating Karen's life. So I don't have to tell you that climate change is one of the most important challenges that humanity is facing. What Chile has to offer? Chile is a very long and thin country, right? It's longer actually than the USA. So in Chile, you find a huge variety of climates. You have the north, with the driest place on earth, with Iquique, 16 years without rainfall. And then in the south, humid forests. And then in the middle, you have a climate that is similar to the European Mediterranean. So it's a wonderful opportunity to study, to observe what has been happening with climate and what is happening now due to the action of men. That's one thing. The second thing is Chile is a reference in Latin America, and I would say in the world, for how their efforts to mitigate climate change. The main activity that we have to promote to reduce climate change is changing the energy sources. Chile has a very ambitious plan. By 2030, 70% of total energy will be generated with renewable sources. That's an example for the world. So there's a lot of investment going on in the north on solar energy, a lot of investments in the Patagonia with the wind. Lots to learn there. And the third issue is Chile and Uruguay, that's where I was born, were the first two countries to issue sovereign bonds. Sovereign bonds is a mechanism that a country has to borrow money. These two countries were the first ones to issue sovereign bonds that are tied to sustainability performance. So basically what it says is, if these countries comply with what they promise in the Paris Agreement, they have a certain interest rate in those bonds. If they don't comply, the interest goes up. And that's a lot of money for a country. But it's a wonderful message for the world that this is not just talking about doing something. This is an example of countries actually doing something about it. So wonderful opportunities to work with Chile.
Thank you. Then I could follow up with that, Walter. I've been in Chile a number of times, especially recently, and everyone there is quite excited, as they are in Brazil, about the new climate school, President Bollinger at Columbia. Walter, if we look to the next, I wouldn't say 100 years, but the next decade, how could this new climate school, the mobilization of climate resources here at the university, how could we interact most productively with Chilean scientists and policymakers in the future? What does the future of the Chile-Colombia partnership look like to you?
So the climate school, something is really exciting for me. This is based on Lee's idea on the fourth purpose, to get out of our ivory tower and take advantage of this amazing amount of knowledge that is generated in Colombia and contribute to solve world problems. Chile offers wonderful opportunities in this sense. We have a long history of collaboration with Chile agriculture, in climate change, in insurance. And we have little time for this. I would love to talk a lot more about this, but I'll just tell you that our experience with these long collaborations, both in research and education, have been wonderful. And there are wonderful opportunities to continue at least for the next 50 years.
Very good. Thank you very much, Walter. We'll go on to Regina. Regina, a warm welcome to you. If you'd like to talk to us about your connection with Canada, that'd be wonderful. But so much of this book we've heard described today, and which we're going to all read if we haven't done so already, Carla, I assure you, is about Columbia graduates, mostly from Teachers College, mostly women. And Teachers College was the only professions available to them at a time where education and libraries and so forth. So a lot of them came to Teachers College, and they were very important, these women, in landmark educational reforms in Chile. Could you describe for us, Professor Cortina, a little bit the arrival of these women as students from Chile, and maybe a little bit more about their impact on education in Chile?
Thank you, Tom, for this invitation. I had the opportunity to meet Karen the years I was in the executive committee at ELAS, and I think that this event is a wonderful tribute to her. I would like to start by congratulating the Columbia Global Center on their current leadership for the publication of the book. Columbia University and Chile, over 100 years of history. This book is a proclamation in the same spirit of the New York Times special obituaries called Overlooked No More. Mm-hmm. These pieces are about people who were not recognized in the past for their leadership. Hidden in plain sight in history, the women I am discussing today were social and political reformers, while they also work as advocates, opening doors for women to education institutions and leadership in Chile and beyond. My remarks today are based on a just published special issue of Teachers College Record. This issue is entitled Teachers College and the Rise of Public Education in Latin America. I want to thank the Institute of Latin American Studies for providing funding that supported the research collaboration with Latin American colleagues to bring to light histories of achievement of Teachers College alumni 100 years ago. So I would like to say a little bit about why all these women came. So in 1923, Teachers College received a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. This initiative created the International Institute at Teachers College, and 7,500 graduate students came to Teachers College at that time, between 1925 and 1938. Lawrence Kremen, the historian and former president of Teachers College, wrote that the presence of so many students who were already education professionals helped to increase the influence of Teachers College abroad. Upon returning to their homeland, these graduates became influential reformers, creators of academic fields, and builders of lasting traditions in public education. The education of such students from all over the world during those years was supported by fellowships created by gifts and grants from New York City philanthropists. These donors contribute much to building the institution of Teachers College, but also the education for so many scholars abroad. Beyond working with the faculty in comparative and international education, students came from Latin America to study psychology, rural education, elementary education, secondary education, and many other fields. Thus, the larger faculty at Teachers College were actively involved with the international students while traveling abroad themselves.
So much. We still have a minute left in your intervention. Regina, I wonder, did you mention specifically, I thought we were talking before, you wanted to mention specifically the role of one particular, Irma Salas, if you'd like to talk about her in the time you have remaining?
So I want to explain a little bit how this relationship was created. So in the early 20th century, Darío Salas, the father of Irma Salas, came to New York and obtained a PhD. After he graduated, Darío Salas translated into Spanish the 1897 work by the philosopher John Dewey, My Pedagogical Creed. This translation helped to circulate Dewey's ideas in Chile, and as a result, and with Dewey's move to Columbia University, after the turn of the 20th century, many other Chileans came to study at Teachers College and at Columbia. We believe in the power of education to improve society and to develop democracy as a way of life, help to magnify the role of schools and teachers as partners in that work. So Darío Salas helped pass the first compulsory education law in Chile in the 1920s. And as a reformer, he helped to create active learning and experimental pedagogy. Amanda Labarca worked closely with Salas to spread Dewey's ideas. And Amanda Labarca was the teacher of Irma Salas. And Labarca founded the Manuel Salas Experimental School. After Irma Salas returned to Chile with her PhD, she was the first woman to receive a PhD. She was the director of that school for a decade. And she was implementing Dewey's ideas of learning by doing. Irma Salas did this by fostering new and innovative organizations, featuring methods and programs for the improvement of secondary schools. And during the leadership of Irma Salas, this new way of organizing the education of the young was exported to other high schools in Chile. And the ideas of John Dewey were implemented and still are present in the expansion of the modern education system in Chile. And I also would like just to say that other Chilean alumni of Teachers College have many accomplishments. For example, Aida Parada was an advocate for the rights of mothers and children. Graciela Mandujano launched the movement for the emancipation of Chilean women. And Mandujano also organized the first National Congress of Women in Santiago. We have identified 24 Chilean alumni of those years, so there is a lot more research to do. But I would like to finish by saying that overlook no more.
Overlook no more.
Along with the celebration of Karen's life, we are celebrating all these women that contributed nationally and internationally to the civic, legal, political rights of women and to the expansion of women's education.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much for those words and the inspiring, reminding us, overlook no more. So much more to do, and we look forward to reading your more detailed work, which is published, as you mentioned, in the Teachers College Record about your work all over Latin America, including in Brazil, where some of the similar stories and people and impact can be found. Astrid, it's a pleasure to have you here. Most of us who have been speaking today have known Karen as old friends, colleagues, administrators, members of the faculty. You represent a different connection to student and to the Columbia Global Centers as a student intern over a couple of years, I believe, and it's really quite unique. Astrid, could you tell us a little bit more about how you came to know Karen, if you were able to get to know her, what your work was like as an intern at the Global Center, and especially your work you did maybe in, I believe it was outreach to migrants, and including migrants from your own country of Venezuela. So welcome, Astrid.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you also to the rest of the panelists and for the opportunity from the Global Centers to be able to share really the small recent interactions I had with Karen, but what I think really lasted a lot longer and will continue to last a lot longer. And for me, my connection with the Global Center and with Karen particularly came actually in the spring of 2021. I had just finished up my first year in a program here for Columbia College students called the Laidlaw Scholars Program. I just finished my first year of research with Venezuelan migrants. This is the group that I focus on academically, personally, and I had just finished up a first year of remote research. It was very much an unexpected, not hoped for situation for a lot of students in my year. I graduate this May, and my class was the one hit our first year, the end of our first year by the pandemic. And I remember that in speaking with our director, we had been told that our second year was really for that exploratory research, something beyond the book, something beyond the numbers and the figures. And for me, my personal connection, my personal interests are really with people. That's really what I've seen now. And I remember the first interaction that I had with Karen was really an email. I had sent an email, actually our director of undergraduate research and fellowships, Ariela Lang, had sent an email on my behalf to the Global Center in Santiago, explaining that there was a student, myself, who was very interested in really looking for opportunities through Columbia and the opportunities that Columbia really had through these global centers. And the response I got was, actually, Karen knows someone at a foundation that I think you would really be interested in. And I had done some research, and looking more into it, it was exactly what I was looking for. This group is called Servicio Jesuita Migrantes in Chile, SJM. It's an organization that works with migration research. It has a migration research branch. It has direct attention to the migration community, as well as legal assistance. And a lot of the work that I started doing with SJM, thanks to Karen, and really emphasizing that word that Professor Milanic used about connector. Karen really, really was a connector, someone who opened up opportunities, someone who really saw a Columbia College sophomore at that time as worthy and needing this opportunity. And to that, I will be eternally grateful to her for that. And working with SJM for those years, I began with the team of estudios, the research team, in the midst of what was then the public audiences for the Chilean Constitution. I'm assuming most know that Chile had just gone through the process of rewriting the Constitution, which unfortunately did not go through. But one of the things that I was able to really learn from this team, contributing my own work, again, through the opportunity Karen really opened up for me, my own research with this team being presented in public audiences, being able to see the fruit of the work. And this was just the beginning. This was just the summer of 2021. And then later on, I was able to, as you mentioned, Tom, I continued my work with SJM and came to Chile in the summer of 2022, was actually able to go to the Global Center in person, meet the staff there. Karen, unfortunately, was really battling with her illness. I was not able to meet her in person, but really seeing the fruit of all the opportunities she gave to me. I was able to continue with SJM, continue my own thesis work on Venezuelan migrants in Chile, again, with the help of Professor Milanic and Professor Murillo as well. And just want to finish with that word, connector, opportunity, that Karen really opened for me, and I know will continue to open for so many students in the future.
I was going to go in and ask you, Astrid, thank you very much, Astrid, a little bit about making the centers more inviting places, more hospitable places for Columbia students. Do you have in a minute?
Of course. Yes.
How do we get more Columbia students to do just a part of what you've been able to do? I think it's life-changing. Could you just quickly, maybe what your thought might be there?
I will start with a little anecdote for this. The global centers for me, I think, are such an important and such a vital opportunity for Columbia as a whole, but especially as students. My only connection to Chile before this was actually just having some friends who had gone to Chile from Venezuela. My only connection with Latin America had been growing up in the US and going to Venezuela a lot as a kid. And I think Chile, Brazil, all the global centers internationally really open up such an opportunity. It's for me an honor to be able to, share on the campus tours I lead that, in fact, we have global centers around the world, and having families stop me, and that's what they want to learn more about. They want to learn more about what are those international opportunities for students, for research, for internships, for jobs. And I think the condition that we were in with the pandemic and the global centers opening up these virtual internships is really, really that vital and critical first step. And I really hope that more students, from what I've been able to accomplish with the help of the global centers, through my own research cohorts and other opportunities, really see that these global centers are really a point of entry and a point of opportunity. And I think, the global centers have done so much work to reach out to students. And I think those connectors between opportunities here in the United States and these global centers are really critical for students to actually have that immersive and really important critical experience that I'm so grateful to have had.
There's another phrase from Karen, the connector. Karen is motivated by her dream of what Chile could be for all its people. And I think she grieved at how far it was from where she thought it needed to be. And that's, I think, why she worked until, I think Vicky mentioned, to the last moments, literally last moments of her life, to reduce that distance. I'm going to look carefully at Wafa. Do we have time for the Q&A? Can we take a few questions? I didn't prompt the audience, but I'd love to have you involved, giving you some hints at further follow-up questions, but you'll have some of your own. I'm blinded by the lights here, so I don't see where the microphones are, but if you can raise your hand and we'll have the microphone passed to you. Please, any comments? Yeah, the mics are on either side. Anyone like to start? Any of the Chileans in the audience? Okay, well, then we'll move on. I didn't. Maybe I could. Before they cut off my mic here, Nara, I promised I'd get back to you, Nara, on. To follow up and any further thoughts after hearing the other panelists, of course, but this issue of the future of the women's movement, to which Karen was so dedicated. We have a new president in Chile. Well, actually 2 points, one for you too, Regina. A president who came into office after a great convulsion, social convulsion in recent years about inequalities. One was certainly on gender, and Regina, and another was on education, which brechas sociales y educacionales. I wonder maybe you could just talk a little about Chile today and these big issues that could or should engage Colombia in the future. One, can I start with you, Nara, on gender issues, and then to you, Regina, on reducing the educational gaps?
Thank you. So one way to think about this question is to think about what Colombia has to offer, how Colombia can engage in Chile and Latin America at this moment. But I want to flip that dynamic, that way of thinking about it on its head, and think for a moment about what Chile and Latin America more broadly have to teach us at Colombia today. As we know, this is a moment of social ferment, upheaval, mobilization, in many sort of realms of discussion, and certainly in terms of conversations about gender in Chile. This is a very exciting and interesting moment of feminist activism in Chile and Latin America. There are important mobilizations happening around reproductive rights and abortion, around the question of violence against women and femicide, LGBTQ rights, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we know that the Constitution, the draft Constitution in Chile, unfortunately, in my view, did not pass. But even the draft itself is so critical. Had it passed, the Chilean Constitution would have been the first constitution in the world to enshrine abortion rights for its people. And even that draft, I think, is a really important milestone, not just for Chile, but globally. And there are, and I don't want to go into the details maybe after this panel, there are all kinds of, I think, interesting lessons that we can learn in the United States from Chile and other countries in the region about how to mobilize successfully on behalf of these different kinds of rights. So I'll stop there.
You're wonderful to do so. Regina, I'm going to ask your apology. We are now out of time. Vicky is reminding me, but a great pleasure to Astrid, Regina, Walter, Nara. Thank you very, very much. You represent so much of the Colombia community and how much they appreciate it. Karen, mis saludos a la familia de Karen, que está asistiendo virtualmente. Last words to you, to everyone else. Thank you very, very much for coming. We have a reception. Don't run away. I believe it's just right outside. So please linger, ask questions if you will. But I'll close it and maybe just ask you to join with me in thanking these our great panelists. There's very fitting words and comments about our dear friend Karen. Gracias a ustedes. Gracias todos.
And thank you from my end as well. And thank you, Tom, for so expertly moderating this panel. I think we have a gift to the family, to Karen's family. And this is a book that hopefully you can take to her daughter. This is the book on Chile. And from myself and President Bollinger, we want to just give you this copy of the book so you can share with her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wafa. Thank you, everyone. Jean,